and welcome to this special edition of Hub Dialogues. Rudyard Griffiths here, the publisher of the Hub. A real pleasure to welcome on to the program Kevin Chen. He's Senior Director, Global Policy Campaign Strategies at Meta, and someone we've checked in with over the last number of years about all things AI, social media, and technology as it changes our society and economy. Kevin, great to be in conversation with you.
Oh, Roger, it's so great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Let's talk about AI, because this is, needless to say, something of great interest to our community. We've seen, I think, all of us over the last few months, a sense of an acceleration, Kevin, of the adoption of AI in terms of our own workplaces, in terms of the media, the world that the Hub exists in. Am I right, Kevin, from your bird's eye position at Meta, do you have a similar feeling of an acceleration of AI in our economy and in our lives?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think people feel it more generally. I mean, obviously, ChatGPT and large language models and generative AI were kind of novel terms. If you think about it, just what has it been 2.5 years ago, and now it just seems to have really folded itself into just the fabric of society and how we talk about technology. But really, I think at a higher level, if you generalize it, we really are in a bit of a global AI race. Many countries have leading companies and leading models, AI models that they're putting out there. A lot of it coming from, I think, the United States, a lot of it coming from China, and then there are some other countries that have really kind of, leading models out there. And it is a race, and it's a race that resets. So it's a race, you could say it's an annual race that resets at least every year, possibly, every few months, where there are many different model builders that are trying to build the next frontier model with more capabilities, with greater intelligence and greater reasoning capability. So it definitely does feel that way. And I think empirically speaking, unlike, I think, maybe past waves of technology, what we are seeing is this kind of, sort of rapid effort to always bring out a new version, a more performant model every few months from different companies. And so very much it does feel like a race at this point.
Yeah, that iteration, boy, do you ever see it in terms of both some of the wow factor stuff, avatars that are now catching up in ways that was just unthinkable even a couple of years ago. Let's talk a little bit about Canada, though, Kevin, because we like to do that here at the Hub. Canada seems to be both endowed with some genuine AI capacity in leadership here in Toronto and Montreal, other kind of national efforts underway. We've done some of the pioneering work, frankly, at the University of Toronto around AI science. Yet overall, when you step back and you look at the Canadian economy and adoption of AI across businesses, Kevin, it seems like we're a little bit of a laggard when it comes to how the rest of the world, how other advanced economies are embracing this technology.
Yeah, I think that's an astute observation, Rudyard. I think Canada has really, in terms of our research, going back decades, in terms of the investment put into places like CFAR, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. Canada really was a pioneer in a lot of the deep learning, machine learning, AI technology that has now led to this new era of generative AI. And we obviously still have fantastic researchers here that continue to call Canada home and are kind of pushing the frontiers of research here. I think a bit of the challenge, to your point, and I feel like perhaps this is more of a perennial challenge for Canada across the economy, is this idea of commercialization, of taking the research, taking these kind of new frontier large language models and deploying them, whether it be in small businesses, in sort of bigger enterprises, or quite frankly, in the in government public sector settings. And so that is definitely a challenge. And this is something that Canada probably, and again, given the current sort of economic uncertainty, given the fact that many reports have come out and sort of indicated that Canada has been challenged in terms of its productivity and its growth over the last decade, looking at various reports that are trying to do economic projections. I think TV Economics had one that kind of indicated that the GDP impact for Canada could be somewhere between 5 and 8% of growth within the next decade. And yet, to your point, when we look at other reports, like the report from Deloitte, looking at Canada, it's looking at something pretty dismal. It's like 14% of those that were surveyed in terms of the business sector are looking at actually adopting AI, which is really obviously problematic for a country that's looking to find new ways to grow its economy.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, the kind of abundance potential of AI. It's still a big question. Obviously, one we'll have to answer in terms of the net effect of the technology as it is rolled out on jobs, on the economy. But certainly, Canada, if it lacks one thing, unfortunately, it is productivity. And productivity gains, and those we know lie at the heart of, in a sense, not just wealth creation on the part of individuals and companies, but wealth creation on the part of society that allows us to have the types of generous social programs that we want and need in Canada. So what do you see, Kevin, as the potential here longer term? And in other words, for more maybe a strategic view about AI as a productivity multiplier that in some ways, maybe Canada, more than a lot of other countries, simply can't afford to miss, because those productivity challenges have been so bedeviling now for well over a decade, multiple governments. It seems a problem that we really struggle at fixing.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think it is a bit of a challenge, and I think for Canada, I mean, we also have to think about where Canada is situated, sort of in the in the global economy, right? And I sort of talked at the beginning, like, look, we do feel like, to your point, there is a bit of a race. There's an acceleration in this race. We're looking at big economies like China and the United States that are putting out these frontier AI models. And it's going to call for a very strategic way of thinking about how a middle economy, a middle power like Canada is going to most effectively play here in order to reap the benefits in terms of economic growth and productivity. One area that we think is going to be pretty important for Canada is to figure out how it can harness and leverage open source. And by that, I mean models that exist in the world that are kind of performing at the frontier or close to the frontier. So really high performing large language models that are given away free. Free for anybody to use, whether it be a hospital or a small business or an NGO or a government. And the reason why I think open source is going to be super important for strategic reasons for a middle economy like Canada is because right now, to train these models, we're talking about, if you look at compute, if you look at people and talent, if you look at energy and infrastructure, we're talking about billions of dollars now. And as I mentioned earlier, if we are resetting this race every year at the most, but perhaps every few months, there are very few economies, very few companies that are able to keep up that pace. Again, most of them are situated in places like the United States or China. And so one has to, I think, as a middle economy, think very carefully about whether or not it makes sense to put a lot of investment and public dollars into building our own frontier models? Or is it better in some way to try to leapfrog that, take off-the-shelf open source models, and then try to win and create value for the Canadian economy at the application layer? So taking these models that are free to use and can be very privacy protective because you can run them on local infrastructure, and then have innovation and research and sort of efficient and productive public services delivered at the application layer with proprietary applications and use cases built on open source models at the foundation level.
Yeah, so exciting. I want to go deeper with you into open source because I think it speaks to some people's concerns about this technology and how, in a sense, equitable it is and the extent to which certain companies using closed models could potentially aggregate disproportionate power and influence as a result of those models being black boxes, being proprietary. Meta has gone a very different direction with its open model. But before we get to some of the technicalities, it might be interesting for listeners and viewers to hear about like the actual applications that people are developing off Meta's model, because you're running these kind of, I guess you call them hackathons. I don't know, what would it be, Kevin, that are people kind of showing really creative, interesting use cases for an open AI model like Meta's, and how this can be applied to real world challenges.
Yeah, so we do have various models that are open source. The one that's perhaps best known is called Llama, stands for Large Language Model Meta AI. But there are other models, and other companies also have their own sort of open source models. And again, the value here is think about it like we are basically giving it away for free. So we have the ingredients. We've built this frontier model, very high performing, but we give it away. And we do it not because we are selfless, of course, we are a company, but we kind of have the luxury of being able to do that because obviously we make the vast majority of our business models largely based on digital ads. We're able to actually invest in a large language model and put it out for free out there because we're not charging for access. And that's kind of the key distinction here with other companies who have their own kind of models. So obviously, folks like OpenAI, Google, Anthropic. These are models where ultimately, if you want a very high performing model, you're going to be paying a subscription fee for access to these models. And that is kind of I think one of the key differences. So but the benefit is open source has this really rich tradition in technology. We've, to think about open source, lots of operating systems, right? From Linux to the Android operating system for mobile to kind of different ways empowering and operating data centers. Mm-hmm. They all have been based on open source architecture. And the benefit is you put that out there and then you let others take it and innovate on top of that. They're able to then build, as you point out, many different applications, some that we wouldn't even be thinking about if it wasn't for some creativity and entrepreneurship on the part of different innovators. And so some examples include, a hospital that says, look, we would love to run and use a large language model locally in the hospital to do something in a clinical setting. We are very reluctant, obviously, to then put patient data into the model because if personal health information is being sent off to a cloud server somewhere for processing, that seems challenging. So what many hospitals have done, including some in the U.S., there's one, City of Hope in Los Angeles as an example. There's another one in Texas where they're basically downloading the open source model. In this case, they're downloading Llama. They're running it locally within the hospital. And then they're able to do different things with it. One example has been matching potential cancer patients with potential clinical trials. And Llama is helping sort through all the data and all the information to try to help augment the ability to match patients with clinical trials. So that's one example. We have lots of other kind of sort of business applications. So for example, one small company is creating an application powered by Llama where it's actually training people how to hold interviews. So they're literally conducting virtual interviews with kind of these spontaneous questions and reactions to these questions based on your answers. And again, all based on open sourced AI based on Llama. And so the beauty is they're able to focus on generating value, whether it be social or economic at the application layer, and not have to themselves pay for access to a model or to create and build a model from scratch.
Yeah. And what's neat about open source, Kevin, if I'm right about this, is that there is an accountability function that's just fundamentally different than the closed models, and that the developers, the communities that come together to write code and write programs off the original model, they can see into that model. They can see what other people are doing, how they're modifying it. There is an inherent kind of transparency that comes with this approach, so that when we are concerned about how these technologies are being deployed, what their potential risks could be in terms of misapplication or bad faith actors engaging with the technology to advance nefarious ends, you have something here with the open AI approach, which certainly seems to me to go a lot further and a lot faster towards the types of transparency and the types of accountability, society would generally want to see in any powerful technology.
Yeah, I think that's right. Again, coming back to sort of the ecosystem approach of open source, if you look at the history of technology, our most robust systems have actually been predicated on open source, very much because the entire ecosystem, the entire developer community can actually look at what's being done, what are the different branches and derivatives of the code or of the models, and be able to identify weaknesses and fix them quickly. You mentioned hackathons as being a thing that we have done a lot of in Canada, but also elsewhere in the world. And that's exactly right. Hackathons allow actually for developers to come together, build something quickly on open source technology. But also because it's open source, they're able to learn from each other and improve. And part of improving means also making sure that the systems are continuously made more secure. So that is a very nice feature of open source. And again, the level of transparency ensures that rather than if you go with sort of a more closed approach to AI, you actually don't know what went into the training of the model versus something that's open source that can be quickly identified and quickly patched up to ensure ongoing robustness of security.
Kevin, talk to us a little bit about the decision that Meta must have had to have made very early on about whether to pursue a closed model for the development of AI, a so-called proprietary approach like Google, like OpenAI, versus why you went with an open source model. Was it a philosophical decision about the nature of technology and how technology is best developed? Is there a business case behind this because you want to see people again crowd in more around your platform precisely because it is open, it is free, and then you can create that ecosystem that really scales it in a way maybe that some of the closed models will struggle with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm happy to answer that. I think it's a bit of both, to be honest, Rudyard. There are kind of philosophical reasons behind it, but there are also kind of practical business reasons. Philosophically, Meta has been working on AI and foundational research on AI for over 10 years. And so when we hired Yann LeCun, one of the godfathers of AI, to kind of start this work over 10 years ago, he brought with him this ethos of sort of academic openness. And so that's the way that papers are done. They're published for inspection, they're peer reviewed, very transparent. That's the way the research has been conducted at Meta on AI for as long as we've been sort of focused on it. And so when it came time to think about large language models and releasing them, whether or not to give away the actual model or not, that really came back down to, in many respects, this kind of philosophical orientation towards open being better, open being more transparent, open being more valuable to economies and to society. That's the philosophical kind of argument. I think obviously there are business interests. We're not unself-interested. I mean, this is a business, and where we saw opportunity here was we don't have to charge for access to the models because our business model is based on digital advertising. What we want to make sure is that, unlike previous iterations of the internet, that we are not, and everybody else is not, subject to just a few gatekeepers that control access to a new computing paradigm. So if you think about mobile, really there are kind of two sort of ecosystems that you're going to have to plug into if you want to be successful. One is going to be Apple's iOS, and the other one is Google's system. And here was an opportunity to get this technology out to as many people as possible so that you have an open source, ideally an open source standard playing a very important role in the ecosystem. That would hopefully prevent sort of this gatekeeping lock-in effect that would sort of kind of be great for economic rents, perhaps, but not so great for broader economic value creation. And so that was really kind of the business interest as well.
Yeah. So we're driving towards the G7 meeting in Kananaskis. There are competing kind of, I sense, Kevin, you're the expert here, not me, but there are competing kind of national views about AI. My perception, at least, of the American thesis is that, this is a dominant technology for the United States, and that there should be, in a sense, an opportunity for America to exploit this technology on a somewhat proprietary basis to increase American kind of influence and project power abroad. And this is primarily being done through, export controls on the chips that make AI possible. Others, though, have a different view that this is a technology that should be shared more widely, that especially the Europeans feel that this is a technology that should not be held or dominated by any one country. How do you feel the G7 leaders and the international community generally is trying to wrap their heads around, the global kind of struggle here to figure out the future of this technology, and in whose hands does it lie?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of debate about this. I think there's a lot of geopolitical considerations, as you point out. But I think, at the heart of it, what we want to make sure is that we don't, whatever comes out of the G7, and there's obviously many sort of conversations about this at the leaders level, that what we have seen and what we want to make sure that we kind of don't lose sight of is the tremendous innovation opportunity that AI presents. And so I think, in the last few months, we've just sort of seen, I think, even globally, even in places like Europe that have been traditionally a bit more careful, I think, we've just seen a real sea change towards support for innovation, making sure that the type of governance models we put in place don't actually stymie the innovation that we want to power the economy, the global economy, and to power the Canadian economy. I think where the geopolitics perhaps is most interesting to a middle economy like Canada is, and again, going back to thinking about what types of AI do we want to be definitely supporting. And so I think this idea is that, and I brought it up at the beginning, there is definitely an AI race globally, different companies, different countries. And when you think about what makes sense for Canada, I very much believe that open source has got to be in the mix. And that's something that we have to be working across the Western world to support, because that's the best way to get frontier technology in as many hands as possible. We know that there are other open source models from other parts of the world that probably have a slightly different view about expression, and kind of creating and putting out there in the world models that actually don't talk about certain things, aren't able to talk about certain things that are deemed particularly sensitive to the host government. And what we want to make sure to do is to recognize that, well, if we don't support a Western-based open source alternative or approach, then these other open source models will become the ones that get picked up around the world and will kind of help power economies around the world. And that comes with, a lot of things that maybe we don't think in terms of values and principles that we should be supporting. And so we do, I think, in terms of this geopolitical dynamic, want to be sure that we are supporting, Western alternatives that are going to be allowing maximum flexibility and maximum freedom to build and to innovate on top of.
Yeah. Final question, Kevin. We now have a new member of our cabinet in the form of federal cabinet in the form of Evan Solomon, who is appointed as our AI minister. What advice do you have for the new minister, for the Carney government, who've created this position? What do you think its mission, its mandate should be?
Well, first of all, congratulations, obviously, to Minister Solomon for his new appointment. It sounds like a very interesting and fascinating role. And I take note that I think, Rudyard, right? The title is Minister of AI and Digital Innovation. And I know over the course of the campaign and in the throne speech, there were various nods to the fact that AI was going to be very important in helping unlock economic growth and innovation and efficiencies. And so I think we are hopeful that that's going to be an important vector in which the minister and the government will kind of pursue. And hopefully seeing that open source is going to be a way in which that can help unlock value, both for the government, but obviously for the Canadian economy writ large.
Yeah, well said, Kevin. Kevin Chan, Senior Director, Global Policy Campaign Strategies with Meta. Thank you so much for coming on the program today. I really enjoyed this in-depth conversation about AI, the OpenAI platform. I've learned a ton, and I know our audience has too. So appreciate your time.
No, thank you very much for having me again, Rudyard. Thank you.
That was Kevin Chan with Meta. Thank you for tuning into this edition of Hub Dialogues. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, publisher of The Hub, stepping in for Sean Speer and Harrison Lohman on this special episode. Please check out our continuing coverage of all things artificial intelligence related on The Hub. You can also check out a great series that we did with Meta 18 or so months ago, The Future of News. That's a special in-depth investigation at The Hub that you can find right now on our website. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.